Hi everyone, it's Dr. Paul Rose back again with another zoo science video. In this video, we're going to look at the importance of correct nutrition to the health and well-being of zoo-housed species. It's important for any managed population that we feed them properly, but it's probably even more important that we understand the nutritional requirements of zoo-housed species, because many of these populations are of conservation concern and we might not know very much about their dietary needs in the wild, so research into how we feed them in captivity is key. Wild animals have a range of anatomical and behavioural mechanisms that they use to forage optimally. For example, the unique filter feeding behaviour demonstrated by these greater flamingos, or the food manipulation that you can see in these parrots. These types of behaviours enable wild species to gather the most appropriate nutrients from the food that they collect. These black rhinos are a browsing species, and that ability to browse dictates not only what they look like and how they act, but also the types of foods that they must select for. We need to know what these species select for in the wild to enable us to provide optimum levels of health and welfare when we keep them in captivity. The feeding of species-appropriate diets in the zoo will allow us to see four key outputs in the animals that we look after. And those outputs centre around good health, good welfare, appropriate longevity, and the sustainability of our populations that we house in ex situ facilities. If we think about health, we could measure appropriate physical condition of the animals in our care. Body condition scores, for example, fur, feather, skin condition, dental condition as well. We can look at normal gut transit times. We can look at the way in which the animal processes its food in the correct manner. We can check for fecal consistency. We can also look at enhanced immune function, because the immune system of the animal will also benefit from the feeding of an appropriate diet. The animal's welfare, its overall well-being and quality of life in the zoo is further enhanced by the feeding of an appropriate diet. Welfare and nutrition link together based on outputs around natural behaviour patterns. Animals are able to perform a wider range of naturalistic behaviours if they have ecologically relevant opportunities for foraging. Correct diet is also enriching and can buffer the animal against chronic stressors by providing choice and control over what it's foraging on, when it forages, and therefore gives a further opportunity for a more complete behavioural repertoire. We all know that the feeding of the most appropriate types of food for good health allows animals to live for a longer period of time. Therefore, we can look across zoo records to see what types of diet promote longevity, specifically a longevity that matches or exceeds that we see in the wild. We also need to consider physiological states and growth and development changes. Can our animals grow and develop through various life stages based on the types of diet that we feed? And we should select for the most appropriate diet based on the one that shows us normal growth rates and the development of life stages as we would see in the wild. And finally, because diet impacts on conservation potential, we must also check that our animals are healthy enough to breed, that their young are also healthy, and therefore that population is viable. There are numerous examples in the literature that show when we enhance diets, when we understand what animals need in their daily nutritional ration, so they breed more frequently, their young are more likely to survive and breed themselves, and therefore diet underpins the conservation aims of the zoo. Good diet improves fecundity and fertility and also can enhance offspring survival because parent animals have more energy to devote to pregnancy, to lactation, to the care of their offspring, which ultimately makes their offspring more viable in the future. Let's look at how zoos can do this. We could look at feed presentation and accessibility of relevant nutrients. For example, this sunbird is drinking out of a specially adapted feeder that allows it to collect nectar in the same way as it would in the wild. What happens if the availability of nutrients or the other types of important things in the food are not accessible is shown in this video. Here is a species of sunbird that should have a beautiful scarlet chest. Poor diet in the zoo has turned the colour of that scarlet chest into yellow. So what other things do we mean apart from nutrients that are in the food? Well, pigments are clearly really important. Pigments enable the development of colours that are used for signalling between individuals in a group. Here you can see a flock of lesser flamingos. They have been provided with flamingo pellet that gives them the carotenoid pigments they need to turn themselves pink. But they're squabbling over that food, which is a limited resource. So these flamingos need to be fed in a way that enables all birds to access these pigments, so that all birds can forage more naturally, obtain that beautiful and familiar pink colour, and therefore experience a more appropriate style of husbandry for that species in the zoo. We know that animals can perform abnormal repetitive behaviours, or stereotypies, if diet is incorrect. The link between natural or normal behaviour patterns and the attainment of good welfare and appropriate feeding is intrinsically linked together. If we are aiming for positive welfare and good health, we must make sure our animals are fed properly for a physical health and a psychological health perspective. Here you can see a range of different stereotypic behaviours that are occurring because animals have more limited options in how they can forage. It's also important that we think about the things that animals get from their foods that might impact on their behaviour patterns. Leafcutter ants, for example, harvest leaves which they then use to garden fungi in the centre of their colonies. If we don't feed the ants properly on the right types of leaves that can grow the fungus, the colony will collapse. And that's obviously detrimental to the health and well-being of all of the ants in that system. Similarly, foraging species that consume vegetation are feeding the bugs in their guts, be that in the rumen, if it's a ruminating species like a cow, or in the cecum or hindgut, as in the case of this tortoise. We must feed the bugs by allowing the animal to ingest structural fibre, because keeping that population of bugs in the gut healthy will ultimately keep the whole animal healthy as well. Lettuce leaves are not for tortoises. Poor quality forage in large amounts is what will keep your tortoise healthy. So know your animals, know your species ecology, and know what they need. Keep good records and try to individually feed in the zoo where possible. Then you can make a direct link between how much is the animal eating and its health and welfare status. If we know what our animals are consuming, we can measure their dietary intake, we can do better interventions if needed to protect their health and well-being. Whenever animals in the zoo are being provided with food, it is essential that this meets their nutritional requirements and allows them to perform natural foraging behaviours. Even when we're feeding wildlife in the zoo, in the case of this bird feeder setup that has been used in the conservation programme for the tree sparrow, which is a threatened species in the United Kingdom, we must apply the same principles. Is this supplementary feeding for the tree sparrows beneficial to them? How much are we providing, and are we keeping those feeding stations clean and hygienic? We must avoid overt aggression and too much competition, and we must make sure that we don't transmit diseases or other pathologies between species as they interact over a food resource. So whenever food is provided to any managed population, be they those directly under human care in enclosures or wildlife that we have brought into our zoos nature reserves, any form of food must be appropriate for that type of animal. We must make sure we are aware of the pathologies that can be associated with poor diet in that species. We must remember the needs of different life stages and the nutrients that they require, and therefore we can ensure we provide a complete and appropriate diet for that individual of that species in that particular stage of its life. If you'd like to know more about zoo nutrition, there is a whole raft of research out there, and this body of research is continually growing on how we provide appropriate diets to captive wild animals. The European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, EAZA, also has a very active nutrition group, and more resources from this nutrition group can be found on the web. Thank you very much.